Tonight, our educational representative is TJ from High Branch. TJ is the owner and, along with his wife, of course, the head brewer for
Sugar Creek.
No. For High Branch up in Concord. Actually, I've been there a couple of times. They have one of the hugest barrels in their brewery, which they age the beers in. When I seen the barrel, when I took my beers up for the competition for the coffee, which I think I got second or third. That's fine. You know, I was like absolutely amazed at the size of that barrel. It was like thinking huge compared to what you see from the, in Belgium and all that, like small, but for, the breweries which we have locally, that was huge. So tonight, TJ is going to talk about hops generally. High Branch is a family-run business. And I've got to say, Aaron Gore recommended TJ to me. I've never met TJ, although I've been to his brewery a couple of times up in Concord. And if Aaron, I respect Aaron one hell of a lot. And if Aaron recommended TJ to be a speaker, that's one hell of a statement. In 2020, High Branch got the best of show at the Queen City Brew Festival, which is the A-Scene for Autism, which is run by Nils Weltley. We all know Wills very well. So that was a huge achievement, to get that, the best voted beer on the evening. So we're going to go through the presentation. What I would request is you'll post your questions on chat, and then I'll leave it up to TJ to address it as we go through the presentation, or wait until after the presentation, So we'll open up the session afterwards for general questions, but please post them so TJ can decide whether he wants to answer them there and then, or whether he saves it to left. I know I've got a bucket load of questions on secondary hopping and how to get that aroma without all of the grassy and earthy taste from that, because that's something I really struggle with. But anyway, no more to do, but over to you, my friend, to present.
Thank you. See if I can share my screen here. Oh, it says host disabled, attendee screen sharing.
Give me a second. I'm going to make you the host now, TJ. See if you can do it now.
There we go. Is that working there?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. All right. So yeah, my name's TJ Creighton. I own High Branch Brewing Company with my wife Maureen, and we're out in Concord, and we make a lot of hoppy beers, and stouts and sours. I think that those are kind of our three main beers. We have some other stuff, of course, but those are kind of what we've become known for, so to speak. So Aaron and Mark asked me to make a presentation on hops, and there's just so many things that go into hops. And hopefully I don't get too basic on some of these slides, but where to start and what people wanted to hear about. Definitely hope you guys have, I'd rather answer questions that you guys have than just kind of assume that you guys want to hear me talk all night long. So I'll kind of blast through this presentation and kind of go over some things, and you guys let me know if you have some questions. I don't see the tab down the side where it usually has the comments, but if you guys have some questions to add, you can let me know at the end. All right, here we
So
go.
you don't see a ribbon at the bottom that has chat participants?
I don't.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, I think I've become the host now, and I don't know if I need to be the one to add that.
I mean, it's on my screen.
Is it?
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Wonder if you click at the top view options.
yep, got it now. Good call. Can you tell I'm new to Zoom?
It's okay. We've all had to learn.
I hear you. All right, so 3 of the most common forms of hops that we get for brewing, and I've been professionally brewing since 2015, and truth be told, I haven't home brewed since we've started the brewery, just because we have had so much going on and just not a lot of time. So I'm hoping that I can kind of convert some of this stuff to work for home brewing and smaller scale versus just being strictly commercial size brewing. So we get access to T90 pellets, which is basically that top left-hand side. Pelletized hops, they store the longest, stay fresh as the longest. Most commonly used in all the brewing applications. You've got whole cone or leaf hops, which is what Sierra Nevada uses a lot of. Basically, that's the one on the right. You see the lupulin glands in there. That's where you get most of your flavor. That's the yellow. Whole cone hops will not stay as fresh. They're harder to work with, but you know, that is another option for people. And one of the newest options is cryo or lupulin powder, which is basically the lupulin removed from the hops without all of the vegetal matter. You can see in the pellets that they have a lot more green, and there's a lot more mass to them. Basically, that is a pelletized version of that cone hop. The lupulin has a lot less vegetal matter, and basically what that'll do is you can use half of that as compared to pellet hops. It's a lot messier, it's a lot harder to work with, and they only suggest that you use that in the whirlpool and after, because you will lose a lot of those volatile hop compounds if you use that in the boil. So we've got a couple of questions, it looks like. First one, max aroma with minimum flavor from hops. That would definitely be dry hopping. Whirlpool will get you close to that, but dry hop is definitely the most bang for your buck when it comes to aroma, just because you do introduce those after fermentation, or at least halfway through fermentation in most cases. So the bubbling and the CO2 that off gases is going to take some of that aroma out with it. So the later you add that in the process, the more aroma you're going to get. Different hop oils when building recipes. I'll touch on that a little bit in the future. More so alpha acids, beta acids, because that'll tell you what your bitterness is going to be. But as far as oils, we do look at that a little bit, but not all that often. All right. So, like I touched on before, we're going to start with using hops in the kettle. I mean, just let me know if you have any questions as far as the basic use of hops, but I feel like just hearing some of your conversations, I feel like a lot of you guys are, you know, pretty advanced to have some experience with using these things. So As far as in the kettle, you can use either pellets or whole cone. Again, you don't want to use your hop powder or lupulin powder at that point. You want to use your pellets or whole cone. So hops added early in the boil go through a process called isomerization. And basically the earlier you add them, the alpha and the beta acids will convert to bitterness. And that's affected by the time and temp. So the longer they're in there, the hotter it is, the more it's going to isomerize, and you're going to lose a lot of that flavor and aroma, and it's going to turn into straight bitterness. So as far as hops being added late, so late boil, 5 minutes, 0, 10 minutes, anything in that range, it's going to give you a lot of flavor. Still going to give you bitterness, but you will get a lot of that flavor that carries over into the beer. Whirlpool is basically after you turn the heat off. We use a Whirlpool a lot in our IPAs. And basically what you do is you throw them in there, you let them stand with the heat off, and then you transfer it over to the fermenter. There's been a lot of studies on Whirlpool hops and temperatures. And one of the podcasts that I listened to recently through Bissell Brothers, I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with them up in Maine. They do a lot of IPAs. They actually sent some beers out to a university in Maine, and they found that the difference between a 140-degree Whirlpool and a 200-degree Whirlpool was only about 3 or 4 IBUs. So they found that, it's not worth it in their process to drop the temperature prior to adding their Whirlpool hops. And we've kind of introduced that into our process too. And I think for what we do, we haven't found a reason to really drop our hop temperature stand at that point. So yeah, I think we kind of touched on Brian's question about dropping the temperature. We recirculate through the heat exchanger just to do a heat sanitization, and then we add the hops, but it's still about 200, 205 degrees when we add ours. And I find that you get a lot of aroma and a little bit of bitterness that works well for us. I actually just read something on first wort hops, which is a question from Russ. A lot of studies have been done on that recently, and they said that first wort hops don't really give you any advantage other than your initial boil. When it first starts to boil up, you're less likely to get a boil over later on when you add your hops because it's already created that foam, and you don't get a lot of that foaming later on. But as far as bitterness and a smoother bitterness, I think a lot of that is something that people played around with, but I think a lot of people have found that that's not really what's going on. They basically just equate it to about a 60-minute addition as far as IBUs go. So for us, we do a lot of hazy IPAs at our brewery, which, it's kind of what everybody's looking for in our area right now. So we don't actually add any hops to the kettle until the Whirlpool. We don't add any 60-minute, no bittering additions, nothing. And we find that we get a significant amount of bitterness and IBUs from that addition. And that works well for us without adding too much bitterness and too much hop matter to the boil. And for us, being a commercial brewery, the more hops you add, the more loss you get, the less beer you can sell. So that's something that you guys can think about too in the future if you're worried about losses. So we only add about 10 minutes after the hop stand in the Whirlpool, and then send it to the fermenter from there. Studies have shown that most of your bitterness and your different compounds, the linalool and geraniol, are accessed within 10 minutes. So anything longer than that isn't really all that helpful as far as what the Whirlpool does for your hops. And you also have to think about that too, is you've got another 20, 30, 40 minutes, whatever your system is dialed into, to run the wort from your kettle into your fermenter. So your hops are in contact that entire time too. And at the same time, you know, anything over, you know, 140, I believe 140 range, you're getting isomerization. So you're just creating more bitterness, and you're almost negatively affecting what you're trying to do with those whirlpool hops by adding in extra time and isomerizing the hops and almost losing some of that flavor and aroma that you're looking to get. For us, we do, with West Coast IPAs, we'll do a small IBU addition in the beginning at 60 minutes, maybe just 5 IBUs. A lot of the newer West Coast IPAs are kind of trending towards the less IBUs, less bitterness. Not for everybody, but that's kind of where everything's going right now. So we still do a big whirlpool with that. We do about a pound per barrel of whirlpool hops. So for 5 gallons, that would equate to about 2.5 ounces for our whirlpool additions on hazy IPAs and on the West Coast IPAs. And another thing that we've really found with hops is we don't want to spend a lot of money on our kettle additions, because in our experience, it doesn't really translate to the finished beer, because anything that you dry hop with just kind of overpowers it. So we use a lot of Centennial in the kettle, Cascade, and then CTZ, which is Columbus, Tomahawk, Zeus. That will add, if we're looking for a more aggressive resinous or kind of like a dank bitterness, Columbus, CTZ, or Chinook are all good hops that are relatively cost effective to add that, you know, kind of a firm, snappy bitterness. Maybe not as critical on the homebrew side, but everybody wants to save money when they can. So Brian has a question on IBUs in the boil, but nothing counts after flame out. Is it true you're calculating IBUs after flame out? So we don't really even put IBUs on our packaging. IBUs, in my opinion, are important, but it's more so just a guideline. It's a good way to measure. It's a good way to work on your recipes, but residual sweetness is going to drastically affect how you perceive the IBUs. Same thing with, like I said, with Columbus or CTZ hops. I mean, 40 IBUs from Columbus is going to taste so different than 40 IBUs from, say, Saaz or Cascade or Centennial. It's just going to be so much more bitter when you perceive it, but it's still measured as 40 IBUs. So we don't use IBUs as an end-all, do-all, but it's a good way to work on recipes and kind of have a baseline as to what you want to use in the future and make it repeatable. But we don't technically measure IBUs, so I guess I can't really give you an answer to that more specific than that. So Mark had a question, best hop for fragrancy but not hop taste. Is that for hot side or in the fermenter? I'll let you answer that. So dry hopping. So dry hopping is basically when you add hops to the fermenter after it's been moved over and is cooled down. Everybody's probably pretty familiar with that. So in this case, this is where cryo works well. You can use whole cone or you can use pellets. Cryo, from what they've said and what research shows, you can actually use half as much and it doesn't have the vegetal matter. So you're going to get a huge amount of aroma and flavor without the vegetal flavors and without losing a lot of beer, because you have so much less mass going into the fermenter. So I think a good example is Equinox hops. Some people kind of get like that green pepper flavor from it. And removing the vegetal matter from the hops and just using cryo actually makes that hop so much fruitier and so much smoother, and just gets rid of that green pepper flavor that a lot of people perceive with that one. So it's kind of fun to play around with cryo and see what you can come up with different flavors from the same hops and what you would expect. So one thing that we've noticed is that adding dry hops definitely adds bitterness. We have the advantage of having tasting ports off the side of our fermenters, so we just taste the beer the whole way through the process. And I mean, we found out immediately that adding hops to the fermenter will add perceived bitterness. Again, we've never checked the IBUs or actually measured it, but it does, which a lot of people were surprised to hear, add bitterness to the beer. Something that we really like to do is add hops early in fermentation, somewhere around day 3 or 4. And what will happen is the yeast will actually take the flavors and transform them into other flavors. Like I talked about earlier, linalool and geraniol are 2 compounds in hops that give you most of the flavors that you're used to tasting in Citra or Mosaic or hops like that. And what happens is the yeast will actually react with that hop compound and will actually transform it into other flavors. So what you smell in the bag or what you taste or smell if you add it at end of fermentation was actually different than if you add it in the beginning of fermentation. And that's where you get a lot of those citrusy, fruity, bright, tropical flavors. We like to dry hop twice on all of our IPAs. So you can add the second dry hop later, which is, kind of a more traditional approach with West Coast IPAs. It's kind of what people have been doing for years, and that's good if you want to recapture your yeast or anything like that. You add them later in the fermentation. So Mark clarified it's hop frequency but not taste for overall aroma, and secondary maximum time attempted dry hop. I will touch on that a little bit in the next couple of slides, so we can go back to that one real quick. So some IPA hops that have become really popular for good reason in the whirlpool and the dry hop are Centennial, Eldorado, Strata's a new one that people seem to really like. Simcoe is a great one. It's gotten a little fruitier and less piney the past couple years. And Sabro is a great new hop that people should try. It kind of gives like a coconut character to it, which is really cool. But I think the real what we consider cheater hops, they're just, it's hard to make a bad IPA with them, or Galaxy, Mosaic, Citra. They're on the more expensive side, harder to get, but I mean, all of them will add a great character to your beer. We like to add Citra to almost everything. Eldorado, for example, on its own may not hold up well, but if you add Citra to it, it just creates an addition to it that's just super fruity, super citrus forward, and really rounds out the flavors on that one that may not have worked well on its own. So, a couple of tips. I think a lot of people, again, like I said, I mean, I was asked to talk about hops. I think that a lot of it translates to IPAs, and I think that that's what a lot of people think of when they're talking about hops. And I wanted to just kind of add in a couple of tips that I could do for you guys to try and work on your IPAs if it's something that you choose to do so. I mean, I'll just add in the beginning that it is really hard to make an IPA home brewing. So if you can do it well, kudos to you. You could definitely become a professional brewer. I mean, just the valves that we get and the CO2 and everything else, it's just so much easier to work with. But I mean, as far as the recipe, a lot of people suggest, just keep the grain bill real simple. A Pilsner base, a 2-row base, If you want a little bit more malt, Maris Otter is a real popular one, something along those lines. I wouldn't suggest using a lot of crystal or making it too complicated. You know, maybe a base grain, maybe one specialty grain, and oats and wheat, oats or wheat, something like that. I know hazy IPAs are real popular right now. We like to add oats and wheat, and we'll be up to maybe 30% of the grist is going to be a combination of the two. And then from there, you know, you want to definitely keep as much oxygen out as possible. I totally suggest, you know, if you have the cash flow to keg, you know, definitely go that direction. Purge with CO2, especially the keg that you're putting it into. Anything after fermentation. I mean, we'll even go to the extent of purging the lines that we use to transfer the beer from one tank to another. And just oxygen is your worst enemy when it comes to hops, for sure. And then, you know, keg it if you can. If you have the money to buy kegging equipment, drink it fresh. You know, bottle conditioning adds a week to it already. So, you know, you're starting to lose some of those hop compounds. And, you know, something that I listened to a lot when I was home brewing was the Brewing Network and all the podcasts. And one of the guys on there said, you know, simply said, if it's not hoppy enough, just add more hops. Which I think I've kind of just lived by. You know, we often are adding hops 2 or 3 times. If we don't think it's enough, we'll just add more. You know, aroma and flavor is everything in IPAs right now. So do different yeasts affect dry hopping? Yeah, definitely. So I think a real popular one for a West Coast IPA is US-05. The Chico Sierra Nevada strain. That is going to be drastically different than, say, a London Ale 3 or whatever your favorite hazy beer yeast would be. I mean, those are two opposite ends of the spectrum. The US-05 is going to make a much drier beer. It's going to be a less fruity beer. It's going to be a less malty beer. The English strains will definitely perceive it as a sweeter beer, and you're going to probably find that you want more hops with those beers because you need to overpower that maltiness, and it'll round out nicely. But you know, a dry beer with less residual sugar is definitely going to take less hops. Same thing with lower alcohol content. If, you know, session IPA, people expect it to be a session beer, but at the same time, that lower alcohol content will not mask the hops as much as, say, a double IPA would. So our IPAs are bestseller? Yeah, definitely. We're constantly making new IPAs or on a constant rotation, but it doesn't matter which IPA we have on. It's always the best beer, sales-wise, you know, weekend in and weekend out. It's just the name of the game right now in brewing. So the next question was general approach to dry hopping double IPA. So this kind of hits on that right there. So like I said, we like to dry hop mid-fermentation. We add about half of our total charge, and for us, that's 1 or 2 pounds per barrel. And I'm just going to say up front that I haven't homebrewed in a long time. And I did straight conversions based on the math. And what that equates to is about 2 to 5 ounces for your first charge of hops. And in my research, that sounded like an astronomical amount of hops for a 5-gallon batch. But that might be something you want to play with. I mean, maybe do a little bit less, and then if it's not enough, just do more. And then what we'll do is we'll do a soft crash. Again, it's a lot easier for us. We'll drop the temperature down to about 60 degrees. take the yeast out, take the hops out, and then add hops again. I guess a way for someone to work around if they don't have valves would be to transfer it to another carboy, transfer it to a keg, so on and so forth. Anything that you can do to get it off the yeast and get it off of the old hops. Typically we'll do about 5 to 8 days on our first dry hop. Then we'll take everything out and then dry hop again for 4 days. And everything that I've read has said that you get most of your flavor and aroma out within 2 days. But for our process and for what we do, this seems to work well for us. I've tried 2 days. I felt like we got more in 3 to 4 days. So that's kind of what we've stuck to, but of course, you know, your miles may vary. We lose a lot of beer, to dry hopping. So, I mean, you guys obviously know more about what you would lose at your scale, but we lose up to 30% sometimes, and even more on our doubles and triple IPAs, which is on the higher side of our hopping. And like I said, you know, this is a straight conversion based on the math of gallons to ounces per gallon. So you may find that that's really high for what you guys are doing, but don't be surprised if you try a beer and you say, oh, I wish I had more hop character, that you have to add more to get up towards that, you know, 7 or 8 ounces per batch or more. So a question was how to maximize fragrance, time and temp. We touched on that a little bit. We dry hop once for about 8 days, and basically that's because we're adding it during fermentation and we're letting it finish those last few points. And when it's done, we'll drop everything out, dry hop again for another 4 days. So an 8-day and then a 4-day dry hop. And we've played around with different temperatures. We typically are dry hopping around 60 degrees Fahrenheit, but that being said, we've transferred a beer to a packaging tank and said, oh, it just doesn't have enough hops. And we'll add them to the bright tank at 32 degrees and, well, I should say 36 degrees. And, you know, we still get a fair amount of hop character out of that, but not nearly as much. So if I was to make a suggestion, I would say, you know, somewhere in the 58 to 68 degree range. For our process, 60 seems to work well. I don't know if you guys have dealt with hop creep at all, or if you've heard of it, but Allagash Brewing really started the studies on this a couple years ago. It actually goes back to like the 1800s, where they determined that hops have the ability through enzymes to break down long-chain sugars to a point where the yeast can ferment them out. So you mash high, you get some dextrin, some long-chain sugars. The dry hops will actually break those down to sugar that the yeast can metabolize and ferment, and it'll drop your gravity. And if you package too soon, you're going to overcarbonate or create diacetyl, you know, things you don't want going on. So we deal with that a lot. So that's why we add that first dry hop to just kind of power through that hop creep that we're expecting to happen. And then that's by the time we get to that second dry hop, it's already done. So before we get on to this one, John asked if we've attempted a sour IPA. We have made a couple. We've tried a lot of different options. None of them that we completely fell in love with. Like he was alluding to earlier, we do have a barrel program, so we do have some sour beer. We've tried blending barrel-aged sour beer with an IPA. We've tried kettle souring. We just haven't come up with a solution that we love. I'm assuming that you're asking because you're kind of interested in learning about them. We found that lactose definitely helps to smooth them out for sure. So I would suggest if you're going to try one to do that. We've also found that if you're going to fruit it, kind of like Hudson Valley or like any of those other breweries that are doing it, that you don't want hops and fruit at the same time, because you get this terrible, nasty astringency and it just gets overly bitter and undrinkable. So what we ended up doing was dry hopping and transferring the beer into another tank with fruit after that, because that will eliminate that nasty reaction that you get, or that we've attributed to having fruit and hops in the same tank. So a couple of tips that I have, something that I really ran into a lot when I was home brewing is buying hops that weren't sealed or repackaged or so on and so forth. You know, a lot of the people that package them will purge the bag with nitrogen. And basically what that does is keep your oxygen out. Oxygen is terrible for hops, terrible for finished beer, terrible for hoppy beers. Anything you can do to keep oxygen away. We have a vacuum sealer at the brewery, pretty cost-effective option. And you can seal your hops up and keep the oxygen out. Definitely keep them cold. I've read at one point that for every 30 degrees you can drop the storage temp. It'll give you about another 6 months or so or more of quality hops. So the colder you can keep them, keep the light away, because just like, you know, skunking a beer, light can also skunk your hops. Another thing to keep an eye on, which we notice a lot with saws or the lower acid content hops especially, is that they will change, you know, from 4.5 alpha to 5.5. And if you're trying to make a lager or something like that, then, you know, a 5.5 alpha at 1 ounce is going to add significant more IBUs than 4.5 alpha. So just kind of keep an eye on that. Maybe if you find that the alpha's high, just add a little bit less this time. And then, you know, just try and buy them as fresh as possible. Buy them from a trusted place that, you know, you're going to get quality hops from. So kind of like what someone was mentioning earlier, I don't remember who it was that said it, but you start to realize how complicated hops are, and the more you learn about them, the more you realize that you just know nothing at all, because there are just so many different compounds. I mean, I listened to a lot of podcasts today. I was driving a lot just because I anticipated, you know, talking about hops today. And I was just super surprised to hear that there's over 1,000 flavor compounds in hops. And, you know, YCH, one of the biggest hop suppliers in the world, is saying that they're still coming up with them. And, you know, they figured they're going to find hundreds more in just this tiny little plant. And, you know, it just, the science behind hops is just constantly changing. And with, you know, the different uses and kilning temperatures and everything else in hops is just constantly changing, and it's just wild to think about how diverse and how complicated these little plants can be. And you know, it's the same thing. It's just once you start to think you know what a hop tastes like, you add another hop to it, you get those compounds to react with each other or biotransformation, and you just end up with flavors that you wouldn't have got from the two hops independently. I think one of them that really opened my eyes was we used Cashmere and Cascade one time, and it tasted like straight Jolly Ranchers, which was just crazy to me because, you know, those two hops separate don't taste anything like that, but the combination of the two, it just created all new flavors that, you know, we never would have expected. And as all of you know, it could be spicy, it could be woody, dank, vegetal, floral, resinous, fruity, and everything in between. And things are just constantly changing. So just when you think you've learned about it, you learn something new, and you just realize that it wasn't what you expected from the beginning. Um, so it looks like, so that was my last slide. Do we want to go back to the point? I have a couple more questions, but do we want to go back to the point where we can chat about this? Or do you want me to keep it on silent?
We'll chat. I guess a question I have is, if you was looking to get the maximum aroma, citrusy, fruity aroma from a hop in the dry hopping, without giving the vegetable, the other taste which balances off against that, what would you recommend as a hop and a temperature and a time period to give the maximum aroma which you can possibly get from an IPA?
Okay. So just a little bit of background on what you're doing. So we're talking in an IPA, and I'm assuming you want some of those fruity, citrusy flavors. Do you keg or do you bottle?
No, I keg, but I've really struggled with
Okay.
cryo. I've used, all the different hop varieties which you can get.
Yep.
But I don't, with I do the secondary hopping, like, a Noda suggested 39 degrees for no more than 3 days, otherwise you actually lose it. So I've tried that, but I still always get the hop vegetable flavor grassy without the huge aroma. I'm really struggling on getting the huge aroma and
Okay.
without all of the other the grassy or vegetable components from the dry hopping.
Sure. And did you say 39 degrees? Is that Celsius or Fahrenheit?
39 degrees Fahrenheit is what Noda recommended.
Interesting.
No more than 3 days
Okay.
in the dry hopping stage. And that was the guy, I'm struggling to remember his name, the guy,
Anthony. Anthony.
Proctor.
Oh,
Yeah.
He did a presentation on dry hopping.
interesting.
And that was their recommendation, 39 degrees for 3 days, no more, end of story.
So, I mean, that clearly works well for them. I mean, they make great beers, but we're at a much higher temperature than that. And with some hops, in my personal opinion, I feel like at 39 degrees, that might give you some of that vegetal character. I think that the 3 days is probably a good number. I mean, we've gone longer, but the longer that you do stay on the hops, you do risk getting that vegetal character. I might suggest that you try a higher temperature, maybe in the 60s, and see if that changes what you're getting. I mean, as far as fruity hops and citrusy hops, I mean, I think Citra is a great one that we've done at a wide range of temperatures, down to that 39. I think you'd probably be okay. I think Citra is a great one. Simcoe, Mosaic, Centennial is a little bit on that floral side, but it's a good combination with Citra. But yeah, I mean, I would suggest, in that 3 day range, you'll probably get a lot of that character that you're looking for, but I would try going a little bit higher in temperature personally.
I'm also a beekeeper. You ask 10 beekeepers a question, you get like 15 different answers.
Yeah, exactly.
Very much the same with, we have multiple different speakers.
Right.
And what they do.
Yeah.
We'll have a different opinion.
Oh, for sure. And definitely make sure, that your fermentation is 100% finished, because, if you do get diacetyl or anything like that, that's really going to affect your hop flavor too. So we found that if we try and end fermentation too soon, if we're trying to rush a beer, then that will really mask some of that hop character too. And, if you like the flavor, but you want more, like I said earlier, just add more hops. It's all an experiment, and you got to find what works best for your process, for sure.
Yeah, I've been really struggling to get a really clean IPA. It's so clean. You haven't got the taste of the vegetable matter in the hops. And I've done like about 4 or 5 different varieties. Mixing with I actually brew today. I do
Oh, cool.
two IPAs where I actually only added the hops at 60 minutes with a view to try to get none of the vegetable matter from the hops. From that, just relying on the bitterness, which I'm actually going to get. So I'll let you know about 3 weeks' time how that turns out.
Yeah, definitely hit it with some dry hops, and that will give you the flavor and aroma that you're going to want to add to that bitterness. But yeah, I mean, I think too, thinking about it, Columbus and Chinook and Equinaut, all those hops are known for giving a high vegetal character too. So I wouldn't use those in excess if you're trying to avoid those flavors also. Yeah, certainly. So someone again asked what the Jolly Rancher flavor was. That was a combination of Cascade and Cashmere hops. We added them both at the same time. Someone asked about biotransformation. So basically what that is the reaction of the yeast acting with the compounds in the hops. So you're only going to get biotransformation if there's still yeast in the beer. So if you cold crash it, you transfer it to a different tank or carboy or keg, and then you add the hops, you aren't going to get that biotransformation. So basically, you want to add it right in the middle of fermentation or towards the end. And what the yeast will do is it will actually take some of those compounds. I believe geraniol is the one in particular, and what it will do is take some of those floral and other flavors and will actually transform them into more of a citrusy, tropical, fruity flavor. And I'm not a hop scientist, so I can't really explain it any further than that. But basically, to summarize, it's the reaction of active yeast transforming flavors in the hops. Bittering hop selection matter? Yeah, I think it definitely does. Chinook, CTZ, Columbus, those will all give you a really sharp bitterness. This might answer James's question about black IPAs too. Those are all pretty common hops in black IPAs. And a Magnum or a Pearl or a Hercules are all also high alpha hops that will give you that bitterness that you're looking for, but it won't be as, I guess, vegetal or resinous or dank are some words that would describe that bitterness that you're getting from like a Columbus hop. Does coffee and cheesecake belong in a beer? I guess all in the right circumstances. It's funny. We every year we do a summer body event where we make these big pastry stouts, and I don't know if that was a reference to one of the beers we just made, but we did a cheesecake flavored stout just now. But it's just kind of a fun thing that we all do with the brewers, and they make their own dessert stouts.
How did that turn out?
It was really good, actually. It was hard to kind of get where we wanted it to be, but I think that it turned out pretty well. It was a fun one for sure.
And you used actual cheesecake?
No. So I was listening to a podcast, and I don't love adding strange ingredients to beers, but I feel like sometimes you got to have fun. But basically, somebody was talking about making a cheesecake milkshake IPA, and they said that they used cheesecake pudding. So we tried that and added it to the kettle. And we definitely got some of it in the aroma for sure. And then we added some vanilla beans to kind of pump up that flavor.
Oh,
And I think it turned out pretty good. It was fun for sure. I thought I might get one of these questions. Top 3 tips to give to someone about starting a brewery. So we.
sorry to laugh.
No, it is.
That's got to be Brad.
Yeah. So we started really, really small, 1 barrel. I mean, I homebrewed for 8 years. I mean, that was my background, and I was in a unique situation where I could keep my job and start a brewery, and we were only open 2 days a week because that's all the beer we could make on a 1 barrel system to supply, the demand. And we just kind of grew from there. From there, we went to a 3 barrel system. We went to a 5 barrel system, which we're on now. And we're about 2 months away from opening our expansion, which we're putting in a 10 barrel system at a new location. So I guess my top 3 tips would be probably don't start it like we did. We were too small. I guess if you want to make money doing it, I will add that. If it's just a hobby, then, do your thing. But you can't make enough beer and sell enough beer to pay yourself on a system that small. I think at 5 barrels, it starts to make sense. But I would suggest starting somewhere around there. Get as much money as you possibly can. We scraped things together and maxed out a credit card and borrowed money from family, and it wasn't, again, it wasn't probably the best way to do it, but it's worked for us so far. So I guess first would be start with a big system as you can possibly get, 5 barrels or more. I would suggest at least 3. Start with as much money as you can, and definitely take some sort of business class. I went into it just wanting to brew as much beer as I possibly can and, see people's reactions and just really enjoy what I'm doing. But then you realize that there's so much business that goes into it too, that you definitely need to know that side of things. And we found a really good accountant. So that's really helped us out.
Are you canning?
We got some great advice.
Yeah, we are. We got our own canning line. This is one of our IPAs, actually. McGill Ave. It's one of our more popular ones. But yeah, I mean, that was one of our first purchases, big purchases, was a canning line. Because we don't have a big, Mark said he's been here at our brewery. We don't have a nice big tap room or anything. By volume, our biggest seller is beer to go. So a lot of times people will come in, buy cans and take it home and drink it there. So canning was definitely a big thing for us, for sure.
Yeah, but the times we've been to your brewery, the people who serve have a really good knowledge and information about the beer which they're actually serving and all the components which go within that. I was really impressed when I questioned the bartenders about what they're serving, because Debbie and I are like beer geeks.
Yes.
Go somewhere and we ask people the questions. If they can't answer the questions, well, end of story.
Right.
Once we've been to your place, the servers knew exactly, the IBU, the alcohol content, the grain build, and all that stuff.
Sure.
Complimentary for your serving. And last week when we went to Joe Vogelbecker, the 19th Cicerone, he made the comment that, if you don't start off with at least a 10-barrel system, you could be struggling from day one.
Yeah. We're no, I really appreciate the comments on the servers. I mean, that's something that we really pride ourselves in, so I'm really glad to hear that. But yeah, we're brewing 5 barrels into 10-barrel fermenters right now, and I think that that's a really good suggestion, because once we got those 10-barrel fermenters, although we have to brew twice to fill them, the numbers really started making more sense. So I think that that's definitely a great suggestion. Yeah.
Okay. So it's 7:33 anymore. One last question, which I asked a couple of times, is if you was like doing in the secondary for the maximum aroma without giving the taste of the hops, what hop would you recommend to use for that?
I think Citra is a really safe one. I mean, you're going to get straight citrus character from a Citra hop. If I was trying to suggest almost quote unquote fail safe option, I would say, load up with Citra. Maybe even like a Citra Azaka combo is a real fruity combination that, get a lot of pineapple and papaya. And just keep it on there for about 3 days. And I would really suggest at least trying, the high 50-degree Fahrenheit to 60-degree range. It seems to work well for us. And just keep it on there for about 3 days, maybe even 4. And, then transfer from there into your keg. And then I don't know what you keep your cooler for your keg at, but I would suggest, not serving it lower than 38 degrees to really keep the aroma in suspension. And, drink it fresh. I've also heard and read some people are taking little muslin bags and putting them right in the keg with hops. So you might try that option too. Add an ounce or two to the keg and see if that works well for you.
Okay. One last question, then we'll move on. How do you feel about like adding orange peel and lime peel and lemon peel into the secondary after it's been soaked in vodka to give that? Actually brewed a beer which I was trying to copy the Noda Valencia.
Yes.
Where they use the orange peel. And I've got to say, I did a really, really good job.
Nice.
And how do you feel about like adding that orange peel?
So we just did a beer with a friend of ours. I don't know if you know Robert Moreland. He was the president of the Iredell Homebrewers Club for a while, the homebrew club that I was in for a while. And he's starting his own brewery, and we did one of his recipes, and he had orange peel in the kettle, bitter orange peel. And we made that beer a session IPA, and that came through really well. That being said, we've also done zested lime peel in a lager type of beer in the secondary, and it worked well for us. It's just a lot, as you know, you said you did it. It's a lot of work to zest fruit,
Yeah.
But I think it works really well. And I think it'll give a good character to the beer. It's just playing around with finding that right amount and what works well for you. I'm a big fan of adding a little bit, and then if it's not enough, adding more. And then, if it's not enough, add even more. Because once it's in there, you can't take it back out, of course. So, yeah. Dennis, in the boil and secondary both turned out great. Yeah, I've had similar experiences too. Both in the kettle and in secondary.
Yeah, I had mine to the secondary, and it gave the Valencia orange peel gave a really good balanced taste to the like pale ale.
Yeah.
A really nice fruity, spicy taste of that. So my next one, I'm actually going to have Valencia orange peel with a little bit of lime and a little bit of the extra orange into that to see how that turns out.
Yeah.
Art never makes the same beer twice.
I think when I homebrewed, I was the same way.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
My wife gives me a lot of aggravation about that. I make a really good beer, and she likes to try to make it again. Time.
Maybe someday. Yeah. Russ was asking if I've ever done hop water or seltzer. We have not, but it's something that I've really wanted to experiment with. I've been doing some research on it recently. Just because I feel like a lot of the mass-produced seltzers in particular use a lot of flavorings, and I'm really interested to try things like you're just describing, adding real orange peel or real fruit to it just to see, what it comes out like. I'm just really interested in that for sure.
A question for you. I actually made a couple of salsas recently, and I followed all of the recipe ingredients with regard to the sugar, the amount you add, the acidity, and they came. I used cephalocline for the yeast, which was recommended also, and they came out like real rotten eggs. The aroma was like rotten eggs stinking that fart.
Yeah.
What did I do wrong with that?
So like I said, I have never made one, but in the research that I've done, it sounds like you probably needed more yeast nutrient. I would do some research on that, like a Fermade K, I believe, and then I think Y Yeast makes one, Cervomyces, I believe. But it sounds, because I mean, if you're using USO5, it's designed to be in beer, of course, and malt provides a lot of nutrients and amino acids and FAN and everything for that yeast that it needs for a healthy fermentation. So with just using straight sugar, you're not going to get any of that nutrients for the yeast. So you'll definitely want to use a yeast nutrient in there.
Yeah, what I've done is I've actually just made a hot tea, and then I cut it 2 seltzer, you just club soda to 1 part hot tea. And that's turned out pretty well.
Yeah, I've heard of people doing that too. That's cool. That's good to hear.
Very good.
Yeah, and then someone mentioned champagne yeast too, which I've heard is a good option. Or there's some sort of distiller's yeast, I believe, that people are using too. But yeah, I wish I had a better answer for you on that. But I think that sulfur is probably from low nutrients in your seltzer, for sure.
Okay, so I think we're probably going to wrap up here unless there's anything else to ask. And I really appreciate your time and education and information for the last hour plus of time.
Yeah, certainly.
Has any specific questions, we'll probably wrap up.
All right. Yeah, and if anybody ever has any questions in the future, feel free to shoot us a message on Facebook at our business address, or shoot us an email, info@High Branch Brewing, and I'll do my best to help you out with any brewing questions, or I'm sure I can find a way to help you out.
We'll be up to visit you soon.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. We hope you have a new place open in a couple of months, so you'll have to come check it out.
Yeah, but if you get the chance to go up to the Concord and look at that huge wooden barrel, which is back in the brew room, it's like unbelievable.
Yeah, it's so what that is actually, it was imported from France, and it's an ex-Calvados cask, and it's 12 hectoliters, which equates to right around 300 gallons. But yeah, it's about 6 times the size of an average wine barrel. Yeah.
And where's your new brewery going?
It's actually right in the same, they call it a campus, in the same mill. But are you familiar with the depot upstairs, that giant antique mall?
I am.
Okay.
I actually used to work in Concord.
Oh, okay. So we're going to almost share a parking lot with them. They're starting a new food hall, and we're going to be the anchor tenant downstairs. So there's going to be a lot of food options. The brewery is going to have a much larger tap room, more outdoor space, better production area. So we're just moving, I don't know, maybe 800 feet, but it's going to be a much better situation for us.
Right.
Oh.
Yep. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation and the information really appreciate the education you provided for us tonight, and good luck going forward, my friend.
Thank you. Good luck to you.